There was no better way to start the year than talking about witchcraft. Because there are so many spooky stories I want to share with you, I've decided to tell you this one during the second scariest month of the year. January! The Crucible was written by Arthur Miller. It first performed on January 22nd, 1953, 51 years ago. This play is a tragedy. Miller wrote it to be an allegory for McCarthyism, which was back when the US government was persecuting people accused of being communists. As I've mentioned in the beginning, this play is about the Salem Witch Trials, which happened in 1692. The story itself is dramatized, but it's also partially fictionalized. Apparently the names of the people that Arthur Miller used were actual people living during that time. There were records of the accused and the accusers of these trials. Now, the story itself is not fully historically accurate, but it does give you a good idea of what these trials were like and how the people likely reacted to the whole deal. You'd be surprised that there were actually people who thought the whole witch thing was a bunch of hooey. Miller's true purpose was to show the horrors of witch hunts and how they solve nothing. The story begins with a narration going over Salem and the Puritan colonists who lived there. Apparently there wasn't a lot of stability government-wise, which is likely what contributed to some of the following events. Now, before the play itself begins, it's important to know that a group of girls were caught dancing and doing some kind of pagan ritual in the forest in the middle of the night. One of the girls was a slave to Reverend Paris named Tituba. Tituba is originally from Barbados, and it's possible the girls wanted to learn about her culture and what kinds of dances she did. Sadly, in the Puritan community, such dancing was not allowed. The play officially begins with Reverend Paris in the attic with his daughter, Betty, who was with the other girls dancing. Rumors of witchcraft are spreading throughout the town. Reverend Paris is worried that this event will cost him his reputation since both Betty and his niece Abigail Williams were part of the dancing. Paris asks Abigail what really happened, and she denies doing any sort of witchcraft, and they were just dancing. Now later, Thomas Putnam and his wife come by and urge Paris to invite Reverend Hale to come to their town and weed out the witches. When Paris leaves, the rest of the girls come over and Abigail tells them to stick to their original story, which is that they were just dancing, when in reality, they were trying to conjure a curse against Elizabeth Proctor. Now why would they do that? Well, my dear viewers, Elizabeth's husband, John Proctor, had an affair with Abigail, which is likely why Abigail wanted to curse Elizabeth. Now the rest of the girls are scared that they will be accused and revealed as witches. Now John Proctor actually comes by and confronts Abigail about the whole situation. Now here it's revealed that Abigail used to work for John, but because of the affair, she was fired. Abigail still has feelings for John, and she thinks that he still loves her too. He doesn't love her. Reverend Hale arrives and questions Tituba and Abigail. Abigail tries to pin the blame on Tituba, and Tituba counters by saying that Abigail asked her to conjure a curse. Now guess who Hale believed? Go on, take a wild guess. Hale threatened to whip Tituba if she doesn't confess to witchcraft. So Tituba confesses that the devil has been influencing her and others in the town. Now Abigail decides to play along to hide the truth of her affair. She did try to curse Elizabeth after all. Abigail and Betty begin to accuse others of witchcraft. Abigail and the other girls accused over 40 people of witchcraft. Included in that list was Elizabeth Proctor. Abigail is trying to get Elizabeth killed so she can be with John. John can tell that the girls are overreacting, but he's not sure how to tell the truth without revealing the affair. I mean, he still has a reputation to uphold. Elizabeth knew about the affair and is still unsure if John still loves her. Mary Warren, the proctor's maid, comes back from court and explains that she and the other girls are officials in court now since they're weeding out witches. The proctors find out from Mary that Elizabeth had been accused of witchcraft and that people are coming to arrest her. Now let's be real here. We all know who accused Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth wants John to go to the judges and clear her name, but John is afraid that doing so will reveal the affair. Reverend Hale arrives to interview Elizabeth since she was accused of being a witch. John tries to tell Hale that he knows the girls are faking it all, but Hale says that many of the women he interviewed have confessed to witchcraft. But see, here's the thing. If the women didn't confess to witchcraft, they were to be hanged. Now, John does point that out, and Hale acknowledges it, but he doesn't do anything about it. Elizabeth is arrested after the group finds a little doll with a needle stuck in it. This little puppet was given to Elizabeth by Mary. Apparently, Abigail had a fit earlier, and they think that Elizabeth used the puppet to hurt Abigail. which is what convinces the town marshal to arrest Elizabeth, even though Mary is brought in and confesses that she was the one who made the puppet and the one who stuck the needle in. Now, John tears up the arrest warrant and threatens everyone in hopes of saving Elizabeth, but she turns herself in so that no one gets hurt. John asks Hale why none of the accusers' remarks are challenged. Well, Hale can't really give a straight answer other than a secret crime is going on. Now, John takes Mary to court to have her confess that this witchcraft thing is all a bunch of hooey, and that the girls have been faking it this whole time. Mary explains that Abigail will expose the affair if they go, and John, desperate to save his wife, is willing to make that sacrifice. Now, at the courthouse, John informs Judge Hawthorne and Deputy Governor Danforth of the girls' lies. This is where John learns that Elizabeth is pregnant. Now, they won't kill pregnant women. They'll only kill Elizabeth after the baby is born. John has a signed document containing evidence and signatures from 91 people, saying that Elizabeth and a few others are not witches. Paris and Hawthorne dismiss this, though, since witches commit invisible crimes, which means that the only people who know of the crime are the witches and the victims. The accused are not allowed to defend themselves for this reason. The 91 people who signed this document are now being arrested and questioned. John helps Mary admit to the girls pretending, and Abigail denies it. When Mary is challenged on this information, Mary is too afraid to fake a possession. Now, John tells Danforth about the girls dancing, and when Abigail is asked, she claims that Mary is bewitching her. John loses his temper and confesses to the affair. He says that Abigail is trying to kill Elizabeth. When Elizabeth is brought in to confirm it, Elizabeth denies it, hoping to protect John's name. But she didn't know that he had already confessed. She was afraid that Abigail was the one who mentioned the affair. The girls freak out since they believe Mary's spirit is attacking them. As Danforth is about to sentence Mary to hang, she accuses John of turning her against the others through the devil's work. John is arrested. Months later, many have been charged and accused of witchcraft, to the point the prisons are full. Many have confessed, and their property is to be seized while they serve out their terms. Some have been executed, and more, including John, are to be hanged for refusing to confess. The town has become dysfunctional to the point where animals are running loose, and rebellion is starting up. Abigail fears the consequences of her actions, so she steals Reverend Paris's life savings and runs away with one of her friends, Mercy Lewis. Reverend Hale is meeting with the condemned. Reverend Paris has admitted that he has received death threats. He wants Danforth to delay the executions to avoid riling up the people more. Reverend Hale wants those who haven't confessed to be pardoned. Danforth refuses, believing that it would make people doubt the previous confessions. Danforth and Hale ask Elizabeth to convince John to confess. She doesn't want John to ruin his good name, but she does agree to speak with him. As they speak, we learn that John is refusing to confess to spite his accusers. Elizabeth forgives John, but John can't forgive himself. While he knows it's the wrong thing to do, John agrees to confess. However, it seems Danforth and Hawthorne want John to accuse others as part of this confession. But he says that he can only confess his own sins, not the sins of others. Danforth is frustrated with this, but agrees to have John sign a written confession to be put on the church doors as an example. John believes the verbal confession is sufficient, and while he does reluctantly sign his name, he refuses to give up the document. He doesn't want to ruin his good name. He doesn't want his sons to remember him this way. Everyone argues, and John renounces his confession. John is led away to be hanged. Paris and Putnam run out to tell John to confess. Hale wants Elizabeth to get John to confess, but she refuses, saying that John has found his goodness. And this is where the story ends. There's a lot to unravel, but let's start with the obvious one. You can find many ties in this story to the events that happened during the 1950s. You could even compare this story to other such times in history. It would make an interesting paper. Also, you're probably wondering how the people justified killing all of these innocent people. They believed they were sending them back to God, back into heaven's arms. If they weren't a witch, then God will accept them. It's really disturbing, isn't it? Now, let me talk about how the people were questioned and how this whole ordeal was structured. The people in power did not care nor listen to the people who were accused of being witches. They believed that witches will try to save themselves by denying everything. So the only way to be sure is to get the person to confess. These people kept pressing with question after question and even threatening the accused until they finally confess to doing witchcraft. Now, why didn't the accusers backpedal? Because that would mean all their other accusations might not be true. And we can't have that now, can we? Now take this for example. Anne Putnam lost 7 children early. She believes witchcraft to be the main cause, which is why she's so eager to side with Abigail when the accusing begins. Anne is very quick to point out people she's been around who would likely do this deed. To make matters worse, there was a confession. Why would these people confess? Because they hope that if the higher-ups hear what they want to hear, they'll be left alone. Half the time, that was never the case. Sometimes it gets so bad that these people think they're actually seeing the devil, like poor Tituba at the end of the play. Also, notice that the accusers are not the ones questioned. Abigail isn't questioned at all. Their justification for that is the accusers wouldn't lie about witchcraft since it's a very serious crime. This is very disturbing. Any of the girls could accuse any of their enemies like Abigail did and get them sentenced to death quickly. But the reason Abigail didn't fully get away with her actions is because over time, the people started to notice the ridiculousness of the trials and started rising up against the government. Basically, if she had stayed instead of run away to England, the people would turn on her. Now, Giles Corey also mentioned that he was told that Thomas Putnam was telling his daughter Ruth to accuse George Jacobs of witchcraft so that he could gain his land. When someone is confirmed to have done witchcraft, their land is auctioned off. The fact that these people knew what was really going on and decided to play along in order to benefit themselves is very disturbing. Now let's look at John for a minute. He mentioned that he can only report on his own sins and not the sins of others. While the people in power tried to press John for more information on who else was there, he tried to clear the names of his friends. But since the higher-ups refused to believe him, there was nothing he could do. Instead of confessing that others were doing the devil's work like many others had done, he stood his ground. It's something to think about. You could look at this as John protecting his friends, yes, but you can also look at it from a different light. He said that he could only report on his own sins, which implies that he doesn't know what anyone else had done. It's like in our own lives. We don't know the full story of everyone's lives. Out of all the lives we've seen over the years, we know ourselves the best. Overall, I would strongly recommend everyone read or see this play. While it is a stage play, it has also been adapted into 3 films. The most accurate to the story would be the 1996 adaptation, which I have seen. Arthur Miller worked on the screenplay for that adaptation, and even included a scene that was meant to be in the play but got cut. The play contains an important lesson, and a cautionary tale for everyone to learn. Plus, it's important to remind people of the horrors of the Salem Witch Trials. I would recommend this play for ages 15 and up. The language is a little hard to understand, and there is some themes that are a bit mature. This story is still a fascinating read today. I'm glad I got to read this again. I enjoyed it when I read it in high school, and I enjoyed reading it again. I hope each and every one of you get the opportunity to read this book or see it on stage. May all of you have a wonderful 2024. Happy reading!